She wasn't a superstar. She wasn't famous, flashy, or loud. She was just a simple woman, quiet and focused, who had worked harder than most to earn her place in the cockpit of the world's most advanced fighter jet, the F-22 Raptor. Her name didn't trend on social media. She didn't chase the spotlight. But in the elite world of combat aviation, she had already broken barriers. Being selected to fly the F-22 was rare. Being a woman in that seat was even rarer. And yet, she was there. Not because of luck, but because of skill, determination, and a track record that impressed even the toughest instructors. That morning started like any other. Blue skies, calm winds, and another routine training mission. She went through the checklist, checked the systems, double-checked her gear. Everything was green. The Raptor's engines roared to life, sleek and sharp like a bird of prey. She had flown it many times before. The jet was familiar to her, almost like an extension of her own body. There was no fear in her heart, only focus. Once airborne, she performed the planned maneuvers with precision. Until something happened that didn't make sense. In the blink of an eye, the jet jerked. Not a normal adjustment, this was violent. Systems flickered. Controls became unresponsive. It was as if the machine had suddenly developed a mind of its own. She tried every emergency protocol. Tried to stabilize the aircraft. Tried to regain control. The ground was coming closer. There was no choice left. She ejected. The jet spiraled and slammed into a remote field, bursting into a massive fireball that sent smoke into the sky for miles. She survived. But what followed was worse than any crash. News broke out within hours. F-22 pilot crashes in training. The headlines were swift, and so were the judgments. People demanded answers. And with no official statement, they made up their own. Rumors spread. Was she distracted? Was she even qualified to fly a jet like that? Was it pilot error? Many didn't even try to hide their assumptions. This is what happens when they lower standards, some said coldly. The whispers turned into shouts. Online forums filled with hate. Comment sections turned cruel. And through all of it, she said nothing. She stayed in the hospital, broken bones and bruises all over. But the physical pain wasn't the hardest part. It was the humiliation. The sense of being betrayed, not just by the jet that failed her, but by a system and a public that didn't care to wait for facts. She had flown that machine for years, risked her life for it, trained beyond exhaustion. But one accident, one unexplained crash, and everything she had worked for was erased. Even some of her fellow pilots kept their distance. No one wanted to be caught defending the problem pilot. She was grounded, not officially dishonorably, but effectively frozen out. Her dream ended with that crash. Her wings, once a symbol of pride, now felt like a burden. She went home, to a quiet place far from the base. Far from the noise, the blame, and the eyes that once looked at her with respect but now only showed pity or judgment. For a long time, she didn't speak about the crash. Not to the press. Not even to her closest friends. Something inside her had shattered, and she didn't know how to put it back together. What made it worse was that no one ever gave her real answers. The official report was vague, loss of control, pilot did not recover. But she knew. She felt something go wrong in that aircraft. Something beyond her. Something she couldn't explain, but also couldn't forget. Even as time passed, the questions kept her up at night. She replayed that flight in her mind over and over again. What did she miss? Did she make a mistake? Or was something hidden, something no one wanted to talk about? She started digging. Quietly. Carefully. Reading everything she could find about the F-22. Old maintenance logs, pilot testimonies, engineering reports. Most of it was jargon. But here and there, little details stood out. Words like intermittent instability, sudden loss of responsiveness, control override issues. These weren't in the news. These were buried in technical language, hidden from public view. Still, no one wanted to listen. She reached out to a few people, engineers, former pilots, anyone who might know more. Most gave polite refusals. Some warned her to move on. Don't fight this. You'll only hurt yourself more. one said gently. But she couldn't let go. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she needed to know. She needed the truth, even if it didn't change a thing. Even if no one else cared. Back then, no one outside her small circle saw the storm brewing beneath the surface. No one knew that the crash wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. And yet, even with that quiet determination, she was still just a woman alone against a machine. Not just the aircraft itself, but the massive system behind it, the military, the contractors, the powerful people who didn't want problems exposed. It would take years before someone would finally listen. Years before the truth came into the light. But in that moment, broken, blamed, and forgotten, she carried a weight heavier than the jet she once flew. Not just the crash, but the silence. The silence of people who could have defended her and didn't. The silence of reports that left too much out. The silence of an institution that seemed more interested in protecting its reputation than protecting its people. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted answers. And though she didn't yet know it, those answers would shock even the experts. They would reveal a hidden flaw that had been ignored for far too long. A flaw that turned a proud moment of service into a nightmare. A flaw that could have killed others. And nearly did. But for now, in the quiet of her recovery, with the noise of blame still echoing in her ears, all she had were questions. The kind that don't go away. The kind that pull at your soul and won't let you sleep. Somewhere, deep down, she knew the crash wasn't just her story. It was part of something bigger. She just didn't know how deep the truth went. Not yet. The world moved on. News cycles changed. The headlines faded. People forgot. But she didn't. While everyone else was focused on new stories, new faces, new distractions, she sat in silence, living with a question that refused to die. What happened that day in the sky? Why had the jet failed her? And why did no one want to talk about it? 3 years is a long time. Long enough for wounds to heal, but not long enough to forget betrayal. She kept her distance from the world that once embraced her. Friends checked in less and less. Her name had become a cautionary tale in some circles, a whisper people exchanged behind closed doors, rarely to her face. Her military record was technically clean, but her reputation was scarred. There were no promotions, no callbacks, no second chances. Her wings were still in a box, untouched, sealed away like a reminder of a life that ended in Midair. But even in the quiet, her mind never stopped racing. She couldn't shake the moment the jet started falling apart, not from the sky, but from her hands. She had trained for emergencies. She knew what panic felt like. But that wasn't what happened. It wasn't panic that made her lose control. It was something else. Something wrong with the machine. Something that reacted faster than she could. The official investigation wrapped up quickly. Too quickly. The final report blamed her. Politely, of course. Carefully worded. But the message was clear. Pilot error. End of story. No appeals. No accountability from the people who built or maintained the jet. Just a line in a file that buried her side of the truth. But she couldn't accept it. Late at night, she read everything she could get her hands on. She became obsessed. Pages and pages of technical documents. Old incident reports. Engineering manuals. Forums where retired pilots talked quietly under anonymous usernames. Slowly, she began to see a pattern. Strange failures in the flight control system, unexplained shutdowns mid-flight, behavior no pilot could anticipate. Still, none of it was public. None of it had been mentioned in her report. Then one day, she got a message. It was short. Anonymous. No name, no signature. Just a few words. You're not crazy. You're not the only one. She stared at it for hours, unsure what to make of it. Was it real? A trap? A joke? But something inside her stirred. Hope. The smallest thread of it, enough to pull. The next few weeks became a blur. The messages continued, carefully, anonymously, sometimes with documents attached. They referenced specific parts of the F-22's flight software, subtle bugs, hardware mismatches, even emails between engineers who had quietly raised concerns before she ever stepped into that cockpit. And then came the first real breakthrough. A former military contractor agreed to meet her, off the record, in person, far from the base, far from Washington. He was older, worn out, and cautious. At first, he didn't say much. But then, he handed her a file. Thick. Labeled Red Hawk Testing, Internal Use Only. Inside were reports from early test flights, long before the F-22 was declared combat-ready. Several incidents were listed, flights where the aircraft had suddenly pitched downward, controls freezing midair. In every case, the pilot recovered in time. But the cause was never fully understood. The solution: software patches, workarounds, nothing structural, nothing permanent. He looked her in the eye and said, "They knew." Her hands trembled as she read the words. She had trusted the system, trusted the jet, trained her body and mind to the limit. But it hadn't been enough, because the machine was flawed, and the people in charge chose silence. Her crash wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a long string of ignored warnings. She asked the contractor why he was coming forward now, after so long. He hesitated, then said something she never forgot, "Because when you hit the ground, I knew it was going to happen again. And maybe next time, someone wouldn't walk away." That night, she cried. Not from sadness, but from relief. Finally, someone believed her. Finally, there was proof she hadn't been the failure. But belief wasn't enough. She needed others to see it too, to know the truth. The question was how. She couldn't go public. Not yet. Not without more evidence. And so she kept going. She reached out to more people, quietly, respectfully, patiently. Some slammed the door. Others didn't reply. But a few whispered yes. One by one, pieces began to fall into place. Logs from other pilots who'd filed unofficial complaints. Emails from mid-level engineers who flagged system malfunctions only to be told to keep it internal. A training manual that had been quietly updated to warn pilots how to respond to a very specific, rare system freeze, a freeze eerily similar to what she had experienced. It was all there, hidden in footnotes, buried in bureaucracy, written in a language designed to confuse. But she understood now. She understood that her crash wasn't just a tragic accident. It was a consequence of silence, a product of fear of damaging the reputation of a billion-dollar jet, fear of political fallout, fear of admitting that something so advanced, so powerful, so proudly American, could be dangerously flawed. She began to see how deep it went. A report from a major Air Force contractor had once warned that the F-22's flight system may not handle edge case failures with consistent logic. The report was dated 5 years before her crash. No action had been taken. And still, no one had apologized. No one had explained. Her anger grew, not hot and wild, but cold and focused. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about truth. About the next pilot. About every man or woman who stepped into that jet thinking it would protect them. She thought about the young cadets she had once mentored. How proud they were to fly. How eager. Would they be told the truth? Or would they learn it like she did, falling from the sky, alone, blamed? She couldn't let that happen. And so, she prepared. She gathered every piece of evidence. Every note. Every testimony. She built a case, carefully, like a soldier loading a weapon. Not to destroy, but to defend. Not for revenge, but for justice. And though the world still thought she was forgotten, still believed the lie printed on that 3-year-old report, she knew the truth was finally coming. And once it did, it couldn't be ignored. Because the silence was breaking. And someone was finally listening. It started with a leak. Not a dramatic press conference. Not a headline-breaking interview. Just a quiet file posted to an obscure online forum under an untraceable username. But what it contained was explosive. A detailed internal report, stamped confidential, not for release, from a private defense contractor working closely with the U.S. Air Force. The contents were clear and damning. Inside the report was a breakdown of the F-22 Raptor's flight control system, a deep dive into a persistent and well-documented problem buried under layers of bureaucratic silence. The system flaw had a name: autonomous override latency failure. In simple terms, under certain flight conditions, The jet's onboard systems could misread control input and lock out the pilot's manual commands. It was rare, almost impossible to reproduce in simulations, but not unheard of. In fact, it had happened before, multiple times. But in every other case, the pilot either recovered in time, or the incident was dismissed as user error. Until her. Now, with the report in public view, the story spread like fire. Independent defense bloggers picked it up. Aviation analysts began reviewing archived footage and incident data. Her crash, once used as a case study in failure, was now being re-examined under a brutal new light. The tone changed. Comments that once mocked her now asked the same question she had been asking all along. Why did they hide this? Within 48 hours, a retired general went on live TV and said the words no one expected. We failed her. And we failed the truth. The media jumped. The same outlets that once dragged her name through the mud were now scrambling to run profiles, make amends, and frame her as a whistleblower. But she hadn't wanted the spotlight. She had never chased it, even when she had every right to demand it. But now, it found her anyway. They called her to testify, not in front of cameras, but in a closed-door committee. Lawmakers wanted to know what she knew, how she knew it, and why she had never spoken sooner. She told them everything. The silence. The blame. The cover-up. The quiet voices who helped her piece the puzzle back together. She named no names, out of respect for those who feared retaliation. But she didn't hold back. Some in that room looked ashamed. Others looked angry. One senator leaned forward and whispered, "You should have never been left to carry this alone." But she had. For 3 years. While the system did nothing. It wasn't long before the military issued a formal response. Carefully worded, heavy with legal caution. They didn't use the word cover-up. But they admitted to miscommunication, failure to act on early warnings, and unfortunate procedural errors in the investigation of her crash. They announced sweeping updates to the F-22 systems and ordered immediate retraining on how to handle override failures. It was something. Not enough, but something. Then, quietly, one morning, a letter arrived at her door. Official military seal. Signed by the Secretary of the Air Force. Inside, a statement of formal exoneration. It stated, in black and white, that she had not caused the crash. That her actions during the emergency were in line with the highest standards of Air Force training and professionalism. That she had, in fact, done everything right. It should have felt like victory. But all she felt was quiet. There was no celebration. No cheering crowds. Just a long, deep breath she'd been holding for years finally let go. But she wasn't the only one breathing easier. Pilots across the country, active, retired, and in training, began to speak up. Stories surfaced of other near misses, strange glitches, unexplained moments in the air. The culture of silence that had once choked out fear began to crack open. She had lit the match. She agreed to speak publicly once. Just once. Not for herself, but for the next woman. The next pilot. The next person who might find themselves falling from the sky with no one willing to listen. Her speech wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was calm. Honest. A quiet reflection delivered to a packed hall at an aviation safety conference. She said, "For 3 years, I believed I had failed. I let others tell me I wasn't enough. That I didn't belong in the sky. But the truth is, I was betrayed, not by a machine, but by silence. And silence is the most dangerous system failure of all." The room was still. When she stepped down, they stood to applaud, not just for her words, but for her strength, her dignity, and her refusal to give up on the truth even when the world turned its back. One of the younger pilots in attendance approached her after. She was barely out of training. Nervous, starry-eyed, full of ambition. She said, "I've always dreamed of flying the Raptor. But I was scared after your crash. Now I'm not. Because you made sure they fixed what they ignored. You made it safer, for all of us." That was the moment she realized something had changed. Not just in the system, but in her. The weight she carried had finally shifted, not gone, but lighter. Still, some scars remain. Even now, she avoids watching footage of the crash. She still wakes sometimes in the middle of the night, heart racing, hearing the alarms of the cockpit in her dreams. Her body healed, but the memory never left. And maybe that's okay. Maybe some pain isn't meant to fade. Maybe it's meant to remind. She doesn't fly anymore, not combat jets at least. But she teaches, trains, mentors, not as someone who fell, but as someone who rose back up. Every cadet who walks into her classroom knows her story, not as a cautionary tale, but as a truth-teller's path. They don't see failure. They see courage. And when they ask her what kept her going, she says simply, "Because if I didn't, who would?" There's a photo that hangs in her home, one taken before the crash. She's standing beside the Raptor, helmet tucked under her arm, sun on her face. You can't tell from the picture what would happen next. You can't see the storm coming. But now, when she looks at it, she doesn't see the fall. She sees the fight. The quiet, relentless fight to be heard. And in that, there's something unshakable. Because she may have been just a simple woman in the eyes of the world. But in the sky, and in the hearts of those she inspired, she became something else entirely.